Welcome, friends, to a gathering place for the curious and the brave. Do you ever feel a shiver run down your spine on a perfectly ordinary day? Does the rustle of leaves in the wind sometimes whisper secrets in your ear? We delve into the realm of the unexplained. These are true stories, whispered through generations, passed down from campfire to campfire, each one abrush with the unseen. So settle in, adjust the lights, and prepare to be chilled. Tonight, we share true scary stories. Before I tell you this story, I want to point out that I was much younger and less mature than I am now when this takes place. Since this experience, I've learned quite a lot. At the time, I was only 20 years old and had just recently moved out on my own. I was living in an apartment and had a job as well. I had saved up just enough money to buy myself a car. My budget was low, and I knew the only car I would likely be able to buy was an older vehicle with a lot of miles on it. As long as it was durable and ran well, though, I really didn't care. I was just happy to be able to purchase my own car at all. I lived close enough to the city that I could take buses places, but having a car was much more convenient. I started looking on Craigslist for a vehicle and set my budget as well. After a few days of looking around, I found one I thought would be really good. The price was very reasonable, and the car looked to be in excellent shape. The listing was very recent, so I reached out to the seller. When I was contacted, he seemed very friendly at first, telling me his name was Mark. I decided I probably did want to buy this vehicle, but I should at least go and look at it first. Maybe do a test drive to make sure it worked as well as it looked. Mark said that I could see it that very same night, or the next one if I wanted to, whichever I preferred. I decided on the next night and asked Mark if there was a public location nearby that we could meet at. Mark said no, and that I had to go over to his house. I foolishly agreed. To be honest, I wanted to meet in a public place not because I was suspicious of him, but because I could only take buses and public transportation places. I would have to walk much farther to get to his house, rather than take a bus stop to a shopping center. He also told me to come somewhat later at night, I think around 7 or 8 p.m. maybe. Still, I really wanted this car, so I took the bus to his general area. I then had to walk many blocks to get over to his house. When I got closer to the address he'd given me, I texted him. However, Mark did not immediately get back to me. Soon, I actually made it to his address. He had a pretty typical-looking home in a neighborhood with lots of other similar ones. I saw the car sitting in the driveway, right beside his garage. I walked up to his front door and knocked on it. I waited for a while, but he didn't answer the door. He did text me, though. I got a notification on my phone shortly after knocking. When I looked at it, it said, "Come inside." I was confused as to why he wanted me to go inside of his house. The car I wanted to look at was right here. I know I shouldn't have, but I actually did. I opened the door slowly and announced that I was there. I said hello, but Mark didn't respond to me. The house looked very typical inside. I was in the living room, but I didn't hear or see Mark anywhere. I didn't hear or see anyone at all. I stood there by the doorway, just a few feet in, very confused. All of a sudden I heard a voice say, "Come on in, over here!" His voice was coming from a ways into the house around a corner. It seemed like I couldn't see him at all. I started walking inside to where I'd heard his voice. Just a few steps in, though, suddenly all of the lights went out and it became pitch black inside. I couldn't see a thing when this happened. I knew I had to get out of there right now. I turned around and tried to head for the door, but it was so dark I had no clue if I was going the right direction. Meanwhile, I started to hear footsteps quickly approaching from behind. I sped up and ran into a wall, then tried to blindly feel my way to the door. Just moments later, the footsteps reached me, and I felt somebody grabbing for me. They got the left part of my arm. I darted forward into the darkness and away from them. I got lucky and just so happened to run into the door, which I quickly felt around for the handle. I yanked it open. Even though it was dark outside, I could see much better than I could in there. I sprinted from the house and was not followed outside. I ran away down the street and didn't stop until I made it back to the bus stop. I kept a careful eye out as I waited for the next bus, but I didn't see anyone suspicious around. I was able to catch the bus home. When I got back, I looked on Craigslist, and the ad had been taken down. I called the police non-emergency line and reported the incident. Looking back at that experience, I know I should not have entered that home. I also probably should not have met the guy at his house either. I did end up finding a car not too long after, which I did buy as well through Craigslist. I still use Craigslist to this day even, but I'm much more careful. I always make sure to meet the person in a public place, and I never go to someone's private property. Shortly after I entered high school, my mother disappeared. After school, my dad sat me down and told me in a very serious tone about what happened. He said that my mom had been having an affair, and she had a boyfriend that none of us knew about for several years apparently. I remember that moment where I felt my heart sink. It was when my dad said she had abandoned him and I. He hung his head low after he said that, and it's a moment that my mind keeps replaying from time to time. I decided in that moment that I would make efforts to show him just how much he meant to me, to cherish him just as much as I had cherished my mother. Strange goings-on began to happen at my home after that day. I can't say all of them are unexplainable, because a house suddenly without a mother to a high school girl would certainly take some adjusting. There were some things going on for sure, though. We kept finding hair everywhere, long black hair. I had short dyed brown hair at the time, so it certainly wasn't mine, and my dad didn't have long hair either. It was weird as hell. In addition to the strange hair, we noticed that doors which we were certain we had closed would be opened, and certain things around the house went missing. My dad said he was concerned that my mom was getting in and out of the house while we were away, but I didn't know what to think. I don't know why, but my first thought was something closer to my mom is dead. I guess because of all that was happening in our home, it felt close to some sort of paranormal activity, rather than some random person breaking in. I kept thinking about it and pondering what was going on. Not many days had passed at this point, from the time that my dad had told me my mom had left. One day, something clicked with me. It was the sight of a certain pair of shoes that were right by the door. They were very sentimental and belonged to my mother. Surely, if she had just planned on running away from her family, she would have left wearing those, or at least taking them with her. So why were they still there? My mind produced a strange and frightening thought. If that's still there, and I discovered various other items belonging to her tucked away as well, then what happened to my mom? Why did she leave all these things behind? I suppose it's possible I just could have been trying to cope with the thought of her having abandoned me. But why had this all happened? I had lots of thoughts and emotions to process, and I certainly doubted my theory. My gut didn't doubt it as much as my head, though. It niggled away at me and ate away. I felt the urge to question my father further, but then I went against it. I had already lost my mother. If I got my father in trouble or pushed him away from me, then who would take care of me? I'd have no parents to protect me. I knew that my dad loved my mom, and I didn't think he would lie to me. Why would he do anything to her anyway? If I was wrong about my strange theory, then I don't know how I could ever look my dad in the eye again after accusing him of something like that. So I carried on like normal, despite my strange gut feeling. However, all the strange goings-on at home continued. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps, and I knew they weren't my father's. I could just tell by the weight of them. I was extremely frightened. I lay there in bed, praying they didn't come to my room. I pulled the covers up and tightened them over my head, but the covers couldn't drown out the sound of footsteps approaching. Despite my best wishes, they appeared to enter my bedroom. I really hope my dad wasn't right about this actually being intruders. I heard the footsteps stop at the side of my bed and felt a presence come close to my cheek. I opened my eyes and thought I could see my mother standing by the side of my bed. Whether this was real or just a dream, the figure looked me in the eyes and said 2 words, "Get out." I was terrified. I screwed my eyes shut and turned over on my side. After a few seconds, though, I couldn't fight the urge to keep my eyes shut, so I opened them. I looked around, but the figure was gone. I asked myself if it was ever really there at all. Maybe it had just been a hallucination from stress, or maybe I was dreaming, and this was my subconscious trying to tell me something. I guess my theory about my father was really weighing on me. I couldn't live in that house, and I had to move out. I knew I wouldn't be able to tell my father why I was moving, though. On top of that, I wasn't anywhere near old enough to be living alone. I seemed to be the only one in the house who'd had such a strange encounter. My father was moving on as if nothing had happened. Ever since my mom went missing, my father had switched to working at home, doing all the chores and trying to give me the best upbringing I could have hoped for. When I sat down with him at dinner, it felt very awkward to have these doubts in my mind. I could do little more than pretend that nothing was happening. I fell asleep on the sofa one afternoon and woke up to a strange feeling in my stomach. I looked over and noticed an old school bag of mine that I hadn't touched in a while. My dad was busy cooking in the kitchen and yelled at me, asking what was wrong. I quickly replied that nothing was the matter. I just remembered I had some homework to do. He replied that dinner was almost ready, and I looked over towards the bag. I wondered why I was getting this strange feeling. I got up and went over to it. It was a bag I used to use a while ago, and hadn't touched it ever since my mom had gone away. I started digging through it, thinking maybe I was feeling nostalgic for a time when my mother was there. There was obviously nothing stored in the main compartment of the bag, but I just so happened to open up one of the side pockets and found something inside. What was in there was a small folded note. It had been folded into quarters and been stuffed right into the bottom. I unfolded it and instantly recognized the handwriting. It was a note from my mother, saying that if anything happened to her, then it was my dad's responsibility. I realized that I didn't have the capacity to deal with all this, and so I ran away. I have no idea if the eerie feelings I had in my gut or my theory was true, but I just couldn't stay there anymore. Obviously, I've not been in contact with my father since then, and I've been doing my best to make my way as I go. This story takes place a week before Halloween of 2022. My group of friends at the time were really into the whole party scene, so of course I joined them whenever there was someone throwing one. The week before Halloween, my friend was hosting a Halloween party at an Airbnb that she had rented with the other hosts. Since my friend group and the host group knew each other, it was pretty easy for all 8 of us to get onto the list of this very exclusive party. Here's some background on where the house party was. Now, I live in Colorado, and if you're from here, you might know that Aurora is more on the high crime rate side. The house was the only one at the end of a cul-de-sac, with a huge wooden gate surrounding the whole place. There was only one way in and one way out. The house had the whole front side covered in windows. Anyway, with that out of the way, it's time to get down to the story of what actually happened. We drove down to the party around 10 o'clock after the pregame, and when we arrived, we parked right in front of the house. Everything was normal, everyone was dancing, taking shots, and just letting loose. At about 1 a.m., I had the urge to use the restroom, so I tapped on the shoulder of one of my 8 friends I was around and asked him to accompany me to the bathroom. We agreed, and we both went to the other end of the home to get in line for the restroom. When it was our turn to use it, my friend said he really needed to go. Seeing as I was not in an urgent state myself, I let him go first. About a minute or two into him being in the bathroom, I was shaken out of a slight daze when I heard the haunting sounds of loud gunshots, followed by screams coming from the front end of the house. I banged on the bathroom door, urgently trying to get my friend to come out so we could leave together. He did not open the door. As time continued, I felt as though it was running out. I heard the gunshots get closer and closer behind me. I made the decision to bring everyone who was in line behind me with me into a room to the right of the bathroom. About 5 of us rushed in, slamming the door behind us. I tried to run to the window, but I was stopped by someone telling me they were shooting from outside. I retreated helplessly into the closet of the room and laid my head on my knees, praying for a safe return home. I then heard the same gunshots and screams from the other side of the wall. After what felt like hours, a silence fell over the whole house. It was time to get out before it was too late. I got up out of the closet and crept my way outside to the hallway. I ran to the front door, seeing my friend the host holding it down. She yelled at everyone to leave through the back. That's when I found another one of my friends who we came with, and we both ran. We had to run towards the front, as there didn't seem to be a back exit that I could find. Turning to the corner leading to the front, I saw a horrific scene. I quickly looked at the front of the home to see the whole glass wall had shattered. I looked at the dying kid in front of the driveway with his girlfriend screaming for him. I was in shock. All I could do was run. By the time we were actually leaving, the cops had blocked off the entrance to the cul-de-sac. We had no option but to stay and be questioned. We waited outside in the brisk October air until about 4 a.m. That was when we were transported. I later found out a car had pulled up in front of the house and men in Halloween masks had rolled down their windows. They started randomly shooting at the house. We were held until 11:30 a.m. The following morning, I went home, thinking of the man I'd seen bleeding to death in the entrance of the home. I'm very grateful that all of my friends who were in the front when it all happened made it back home safe and sound. I haven't been able to go to a house party ever since, and we've all grown somewhat distant from each other. I want to take this moment to be serious and warn everyone that it's very important to be aware, not only of what's around you, but of who's around you as well. Please be careful. So this just happened to me today. I'm submitting this story while it's still fresh in my mind, and before I get too busy to do so. This is more of a creepy, unexplainable story than anything else. This happened this morning, around 6:30 a.m. Before I continue with this story, though, there are a few things that I need to explain. For one, I'm a 19-year-old woman living with my mom and little sister. My mom always wakes up at 3:30 a.m. for work, and she normally leaves between 4:30 and 4:40. Her job is only about 15 minutes away. Also, if anyone is wondering what I was doing up so late, it's because I used to work third shift at Sheetz, which is a gas station. I'm used to staying up all night until the early morning. Another thing I want to mention is about our front door. Well, my room is right next to the living room where the front door is, and our front door is pretty heavy. Whenever someone goes in and out, even if I'm listening to loud music with headphones on, I can feel the vibration of the door being closed or opened. Last but not least, I can say that I stay in a decent neighborhood, and no one bothers anyone around here. We generally all stay to ourselves. We'd been living here for about 5 years, with no incidents whatsoever. Now on with the story. As I mentioned before, this happened around 6:30 a.m. I was on my laptop listening to some music, which wasn't playing that loud. I was pretty much relaxing when all of a sudden I felt and heard the front door close. Now, this really caught me off guard because after my mom leaves for work, neither my little sister or I would leave the house. Just to be safe, I called my little sister and asked her if she had just left. She said no and was wondering why I'd even asked that. I told her I'd just heard the front door close. I was just wondering. She said that she heard it too and thought it was our mom coming back for something or me leaving. Although I was still confused, I just said okay and hung up. Now, I was really confused as to what was going on. Before I could finish thinking, I heard my mom's phone go off as if she'd gotten a notification for some reason. My mom always keeps her phone sound on very loud, so if someone calls or she gets a notification, it's very noticeable. It can be annoying sometimes too. It has a very distinct sound, so there was no mistake. I was hearing her phone coming from somewhere in the home. I thought, well, okay, let me go ask my mom what she's doing back home already. Before I did, I decided to check and see if her car was outside. My room is in front of the house. I can see her car out front if she's home. When I went to look out my blinds, though, her car wasn't there. I froze once again, not knowing what was going on. As I turned to sit back down, I could see through the bottom of the door a dark shadow of a person's feet standing on the other side. I literally felt my heart drop and froze right there for a moment. I was just staring, too scared to move or even say anything. This was obviously not my mom. She wouldn't just stand outside for no reason. She would knock or say something. Instinctively, I called out, Mom? No reply, obviously. Nothing. That's when my heart started racing. I grabbed my phone from my bed and tried to call my mom. I didn't get an answer. I didn't hear her phone ring either. I texted her and asked her if she came back home. All of a sudden, I heard the door close again. I told her I'd heard the door close and heard her phone going off nearby. As soon as I hit send, I looked up again and the shadow was now gone. I just kind of sat there, heart racing and totally confused. I definitely was not about to go out there and see who it was, though. All I had to protect myself in my room was a hammer I had lying around in my closet, a knife I hadn't taken to the sink yet, and a taser. I still didn't want to risk going out there, though. After some time of thinking and sitting in bed, which felt like a while, my mom replied and said that was not her phone. She had it on her, and she never came home. Once again, I felt a sense of dread. I knew what I'd heard and what I'd seen. I didn't respond right away. I just decided to call 911 and explain my situation. I told them I thought someone was around my home, or even possibly inside. I stayed on the phone with the operator until the police came. I was explaining that my little sister was home too, and she advised me to stay where I was at and to text my sister and tell her the same thing. If there really was someone in my home still, there's no telling what they were there for. The response time wasn't that long, actually. I was less than 5 minutes away from the police station, so they showed up pretty quickly, with the operator reassuring me that it really was them and that if I felt safe enough I could open the door. I grabbed my kitchen knife and slowly walked over. I quietly unlocked it and opened it. Once I opened it, they came in, and I explained the situation to them as well. They checked every room and reassured me that no one was there. My back and side door were locked, along with all the windows. They also said it didn't look like there was any signs of forced entry. Although I was still freaked out, I thanked them. They said they would have an officer cruise around the neighborhood for a while, just to be safe. After this, my little sister was freaked out as well. I'm not really sure what happened, why I heard my mom's phone go off, or who was opening and closing the door. It still freaks me out though. I wonder if my mom could have accidentally left the door unlocked and someone just waltzed in. If so though, how did they leave and lock the door behind them? Why didn't I hear their footsteps? I'm still left with no answers. If it wasn't for my sister also telling me she experienced the same things, I would honestly think that maybe I was just imagining the whole situation. I have a job in the city. It's a major city with all the tall buildings and everything you would expect. My house is about a 20-minute drive away. I commute to and from work every day. It isn't too bad, but there often is rush hour traffic, especially on the way home. This event took place about 4 months ago. After a long day of work, I got done at about 5 p.m. or so, which is when many other people do as well. Many times I'm able to leave a little bit earlier, but on this day I didn't get to. There was rush hour traffic and many other cars on the freeway. I would take the freeway for about 10 minutes. Then the final 10 minutes of my drive would be on quieter roads. Just about 5 minutes in, things were starting to get really backed up. We were crawling along the freeway. I was in the far right lane of 4 total lanes. The one in the left was the carpool lane. We started moving a little bit, getting up to maybe 40 miles per hour. It was still slow, but faster than we had been moving up to that point. There was a little bit of open space in the lanes next to me. I saw a car come up from behind about 2 lanes over. When it got about even with me, it changed into the lane next to me without a turn signal, then kept going and cut into my lane right in front of me. I had maybe a car and a half length between the car in front of me, so I had to slam on my brakes to avoid impacting this guy. He had no turn signal on, so I hadn't even known that he was intent on turning. I honked my horn and was pretty ticked off. The guy was now right in front of me. I cooled off after a minute or so, as traffic continued to lighten up. Cars moved around a little and the guy that cut me off went out of sight, passing by some other cars. I also switched lanes to pass a semi. After that though, traffic started to slow down again and get very congested. Just a couple of minutes later, I saw the same car who'd cut me off again. He had gotten stuck behind a semi-truck, and there were a line of cars passing him by. That was in the lane I was. I noticed a bit of a gap between myself and the car in front of me, so I sped up, not wanting to let him in. I remembered how he'd screwed me before. He started trying to move over in front of me, but couldn't get by. I passed him and he got in line behind me. Unfortunately, the person behind me was nice and let him slip in. As soon as traffic lightened up a little more, we got moving again. The guy swerved around me. It was borderline reckless driving. He then cut me off again. I'd had enough of this guy. I just wanted to get away from him. Plus, my exit was coming up soon. I switched lanes to the right. I saw the guy slow down. When he did, I passed him and saw him flipping me off. I wasn't going to let this bother me though. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, and he was driving like an idiot. I soon changed lanes again. I noticed the guy had changed lanes too, and was still behind me when I took my exit off the freeway. The guy took the exit behind me as well. This was a little bit concerning. I didn't want this crazy guy following me home. As I drove down the road, he was right behind me the entire time. I changed roads to another one, and he was still right there. The longer he followed me, the more frustrated I became. I could not believe this guy. How crazy do you have to be to follow somebody home after cutting them off? When I got to my street, I wanted to confront him and give him a piece of my mind. I arrived back home and pulled into my driveway. When I did, the man stopped at the end of it, but didn't pull in. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood and have a somewhat long driveway and large front yard. I was surprised he would follow me all the way back, but not go into my driveway after I parked. I got out of my car. I was feeling brave, I guess. I didn't feel any danger at all. I think I was more furious than anything. After I got out, I walked behind my car and looked out at the man. He was still inside of his vehicle, with the engine running. I yelled out to him, asking what his problem was. Suddenly, the man started driving. He started going up my driveway and driving straight for me, like he was trying to run me over. I jumped back and ran behind my car, which was all I had time to do. He got close and slammed on his brakes, stopping just a few feet away from the back of my car. Then he turned to the left where I was and started driving forward. I ran around to my backyard, trying to get away from him. He didn't manage to hit me and stopped at the end of my driveway. After I made it around to the back of my house, I heard his tires screeching and the sounds of him driving away. When I was sure that he was gone, I walked back out to the front yard. I could see tire marks in my driveway and saw the guy had also run over my mailbox as well. Other than that, everything was fine. Of course, I called the police and reported him. Unfortunately, in the midst of all of this, I didn't remember his license plate number. Since that experience, I feel I've become more of a defensive driver. Luckily, I haven't had any more problems with people on the road. I also haven't seen that guy since then. This happened a couple of years ago. I was driving back home one night on a quiet road. There was a highway that I had recently turned off of to get to my house. I was still about 10 minutes away from home though. As I was driving along that road, suddenly my car started to slow down. I didn't know what was going on. My car had always run great, and it was only a couple of years old. I never had any problems with it. I realized that somehow I had run out of gas. The light had come on earlier, and I guess I'd simply forgotten about it. My car came to a stop, and I felt really stupid about making such an obvious mistake. My first thought was to call a friend and ask them to grab me some gas. When I took out my phone, though, I wasn't getting a signal in this area. It wasn't that big of a surprise. I tried and tried for 10 minutes, but it just wouldn't work. It was pretty late at night, too, almost midnight or so. Even if I could get my phone to work now, my friends were probably already asleep. I knew the area really well and knew there was a gas station just about a mile away. It would be a 20-minute walk on foot, but the weather was nice, so I decided to go walk and grab some gas, then bring it back to my car. It really wasn't all that big of a deal. I got out of my vehicle and luckily had a small gas container in the back. It was empty, but I kept it in my car mainly to buy gas for my lawnmower. After getting out of my car, I started to walk along the side of the road. Now, the roads were very quiet. Since my car had run out of gas, maybe one or two other vehicles had passed me by. I hadn't even really noticed. The road did not have a sidewalk or anything, so I was just walking a few feet off the shoulder. The grass surrounding the roads on both sides was somewhat dense. There were woods as well. I remember that when I got a ways up from my car, I heard a car starting to come down the road behind me. It was coming from the opposite direction, back where my car was. I heard the sound of the car, then slowing down. I stopped to look behind me and saw a pickup truck coming to a stop next to my car on the road. They were probably stopping to see if I needed any help. I turned around and thought about asking whoever it was for a ride to the gas station. What I saw, though, was a man hopping out of the passenger side and another guy getting out of the driver's door. They put what appeared to be ski masks over their faces and approached my vehicle. I was confused and stopped, no longer wanting to approach them or for them to see me. I was pretty sure they hadn't noticed I was there and probably wouldn't if I stayed put. They probably thought I was still inside my vehicle. I moved closer to the wooded area, but kept watching. They looked inside my windows, as one of them used his phone as a flashlight to peek around. The other guy knocked on one of them and also tried opening all the doors. After this happened, the guys looked in my direction all of a sudden. For whatever reason, they had somehow noticed me. Right after, one of the guys began walking over to me, and the other walked back over to their truck. As I saw this, I turned to keep walking to the gas station. I heard the sound of one of the men begin running, and I looked back to see the first guy now sprinting. The other guy was inside of the truck and began driving toward me. I had no other choice but to go off into the woods. I darted to the right and went into the forest like a deer. I just started running like crazy. It was really thick. There were all kinds of trees and bushes and branches. I heard the first guy enter the woods a ways back from me. I kept running though, not knowing where these woods led or anything. After 2 minutes straight of running as fast as I could through the woods, I reached the other side. I saw a house with a massive yard. I kept running and no longer heard the guy behind me. When I made it closer to the home, I ran behind it and hid. There I caught my breath and tried to figure out what I was going to do. At this hour, I didn't want to knock on the front door of the home. I didn't think they would answer. I waited for several minutes, then carefully headed back down their driveway to the street. It was a really long driveway. Eventually, I did get back to the street I had been walking on. The men and the truck were nowhere to be seen. I continued with my walk to the gas station, but walked extremely close to the edge of the woods. That way, if I saw the truck coming again, I could go back into hiding. In fact, I did hear a car coming not long after I started walking again. I jumped into the woods and hid, and waited for it to pass by. Because of this, I couldn't tell if it was the truck or not. I have no way of knowing if it actually was. I wasn't going to take any chances, though. Eventually, I did make it to the gas station. Then I walked back to my car and filled up my tank with what I'd bought. I made it home after a very memorable night. Looking back, I don't know what those men wanted, or who they were. I'm really glad I got away from them, though. I got into university in Tokyo. It was my first time living in the city, and I was really nervous about it. I thought I would have a hard time adjusting to life there. I didn't realize that my problems had nothing to do with living in the city, though. This happened when I was living alone. I had an apartment rental on the first floor of an apartment block. I can't lie, it was pretty horrible. It was cramped and dirty and not nice at all. I had just enough room for a bed and a desk. I remember there being only 1 or 2 electrical outlets as well. I had to get loads of extension cords to even get the setup I wanted. You need a lot of electricity. I had no idea how much. Wi-Fi routers, chargers, cooking appliances, it all adds up. I loved being online back then, and the first thing I got sorted was the internet connection. I spent many a night surfing the net in that apartment. It was on one of those nights fairly early into the tenancy of that room that I found a weird link online. I came across it on a bulletin board, and the enticing title made me click on it. It was something as simple and dumb as, "This video is crazy, check it out." I knew that message board had good or funny content, so I thought I would find something interesting if I clicked it. I wasn't ready for what I witnessed, though. The content of the video began to play. It was extremely brutal. It seemed to be footage of some sort of gang attack. A foreign gang from what I could tell. I couldn't make out any of the words being said, but I understood the screams of pain and saw the sharp and pointy weapons the gang wielded. They went at one guy with a machete and turned him into sashimi. It was horrible. There was blood and severed limbs. The worst part, though, was the disturbing screams of horror and pain. It was heart-wrenching and psychologically damaging. I only watched for a second or two before I shut it off. I turned my whole computer off and wanted nothing more to do with the internet that night. Nothing else happened, and I felt a little disturbed and shocked, but that was pretty much it. If the story ended there, then I'd have nothing more to say. The next day, though, something else happened. My laptop had been working perfectly fine until I watched that horrible video. Suddenly, it wasn't working anymore. It wouldn't turn on at all. My first thought was, oh great, I must have got a virus from that horrible link as well. I guessed it might have also been a malfunction of some kind. I wasn't sure. I phoned up customer support, but they were of course of no help. I remember testing the USB ports to see if it would at least charge my phone or not. Nothing worked. Did something trip the breaker, I wondered? Maybe there was a power outage in our building. I looked all over, but couldn't find a good enough reason as to why my laptop was no longer working. I don't know what exactly happened, but no word of a lie at all, every electronic item I tried to connect to that outlet that was plugged in when I watched that horrible video suddenly no longer worked anymore. The computer, the plugs, the charger, they were all broken now, and no matter what I tried, they were not repairable. They were all dead. It may sound weird, but I thought on occasion that something that video did had something to do with why my electronics became permanently damaged. I don't care if it sounds stupid, and I'm not a spiritual person, but sometimes I wonder if the resentment and hate of that victim in the video for what happened to them might have carried some grudge for those who watched it. I know maybe that doesn't make the most sense, but that's all I got as a theory. I don't understand otherwise why everything would just stop working all of a sudden. It seems that during the time we live in, my generation is a generation of online dating. I remember being in high school, and online dating was something that losers did. It was for people who couldn't get dates in the real world, I thought. When I was in college, though, not only was that previous statement incorrect, but it was now the primary way my generation met people for dates and various other activities. I was even a frequent user myself by my mid-20s. My favorite one to use was Tinder, obviously. I just found that most of the time on the app I found people that were into going out, grabbing a drink, and hanging out. One of my more unique stories on meeting people from Tinder was the night I met Felicia. That chick was awesome. We started messaging earlier in the day and agreed to hit up one of the bars near her house that night. We met up and started vibing right away. As the night progressed, I saw her mood and expression instantly change, getting to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I asked her if she was all right, and she said in a whisper that I could barely even hear, "You see that guy with the Yankees hat across the bar? That's my ex's best friend. He's been staring over here for the last hour." My ex, well, he's not a good guy. I'm sure he probably texted him. I'm just nervous about him being here. I didn't care about her ex at all. I've dealt with crazy exes before, and I reassured her that it was okay. I could take care of myself. She gave me a half smile and asked if we could leave. Of course I agreed, and we decided we could go back to my place for the night. On our way out the door, her ex's friend confronted us, not even acknowledging my existence. He looked right at Felicia and started yelling, "What, you can't say hi to me? You leaving already? Well, that's crazy. Why don't you just come back in and buy me a drink, huh?" She said no thank you, and he started begging like a child. Before she could answer, I stepped in front, extended my hand, and introduced myself. He looked right past me at Felicia, laughed, and said, "Really?" Then walked away laughing. Ordinarily, that would make me quite mad, but I didn't let it bother me. I could see how much the interaction was worrying her. We went back to my place, and nothing crazy happened. We actually played Mario Party on the Nintendo Switch and had a couple more drinks. We fell asleep together cuddling, and when we woke up, we were both happy and agreed to see each other again. I watched the happiness disappear from her face, though, when she looked down at her phone. She had a message from a friend of hers that was at the bar that night. Apparently not long after we left, her ex had showed up. She started to apologize to me again and told me she understood if I didn't want to see her anymore because of his craziness. I reassured her I was not scared of him. We went on a few more dates and never went back to that bar. Specifically, the rest of our dates had been to outdoor places, like parks and beaches. She started staying over at my house a few nights a week. I was really starting to fall for this girl, and I believe she was falling for me as well. I remember asking her if she wanted to stay at her place one night. She said something along the lines of she had too many roommates or something, and we wouldn't have any privacy. Worked for me because I'd rather stay home anyway. One Saturday night, a few weeks removed from the bar incident, Felicia stayed over at my house. It was a great night as always, and we got into bed to pass out at around midnight. I'm not sure how much longer it was, but I woke up to Felicia screaming on the phone. Her ex had called her and apparently was freaking out on the other side. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could hear his tone certainly. She hung up in a rage and threw her phone across the room. I had to hold her to try and calm her down, and eventually she did. We laid down in bed together. As we were laying there, though, we heard the sound of 2 car doors shutting right outside the house. She started to repeatedly yell the word no as she gripped the blanket. I ran to the top of the stairs, which had a window that overlooked the driveway. I could see a large man in a Yankees hat and another large man with a short buzzed haircut. As they got closer, I could clearly tell the one guy was the guy from the bar. I asked her if her ex had a buzz cut, and she said yes, and that we needed to go right now. I wasn't about to back down, though. These 2 guys didn't even try knocking. They both just started kicking the door in an attempt to break it down. Felicia ran to the door and begged them to stop. They didn't. She then did something I'll never understand. She unlocked the door, allowing these 2 maniacs to barge into my home. Once I saw them run inside, I hid in the closet. I'm a strong guy, but I'm not about to win a fight against 2 dudes bigger than me. Her ex started freaking out, instantly demanding I show myself. I could hear her saying, "Please, let's just go home," and saying she was sorry. I couldn't see, but from what I could hear, it sounded like he was ignoring her. He just kept shouting for me. I could hear things banging and smashing downstairs. Felicia just kept yelling for him to stop. After a couple of minutes, they left, and I heard him shout one last time that this wasn't over yet. I heard the car drive off. When I left the closet and went downstairs, I saw they had destroyed my living room. I sat on the couch and contemplated calling the police. I started to think about what she had said. She said, "Let's go home, and I'll never do this again." The wheels started turning in my head. Was this girl in an active relationship, and I was the other man? I didn't have any social media at the time because I found it extremely distracting. I had one of my friends look Felicia up, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Not only was she in a relationship, she was also married to this guy. I felt terrible. I found his name on Facebook and sent him a private message from my friend's account. I told him it was me messaging him, and I apologized. I told him I had no idea, and if I'd known she was married, I would have never continued talking to her. Believe it or not, the guy actually was pretty calm and accepted my apology. He also apologized for breaking into my home and agreed to pay for any damage to it. I agreed to never talk to Felicia again. Not that I wanted to anyway. I blocked her number. I don't even know if she tried to reach out to me again. I definitely think the dude overreacted, but I'll be honest, I do get it. When something like that happens to you, it makes you do some wild things. Someone told me that he saw them out together recently, so maybe they did fix up their marriage. It's just crazy to me. So many signs were right in front of my face, and I was completely blind to them. Apparently, he worked overnights, which is why she spent so many nights with me. She did an excellent job of convincing me this guy was her ex, but my advice out there to anyone using Tinder, or really any dating service, is to be careful. People have agendas, and they have a lot of baggage as well. You may think you're just having a good time, and you know the person you're with, but they may be doing something much shadier than you expect. By 2022, I'd had my fair share of Tinder dates, some great ones and some I'd rather never think about again. Around that time, I was just trying to casually meet people and wasn't looking for anything serious. I ended up matching with a guy named Kyle, and he seemed pretty alright while we were chatting. I figured I would let him take me out. We went and grabbed a drink at a local bar, and I had a pretty nice night. We talked, laughed, and agreed we would see each other again soon. That night, we were texting back and forth, trying to figure out a plan to see each other again. I agreed to a dinner date next Sunday, and maybe some drinks after, depending on how late it got. He tried to get me to go to some party on Saturday night, but unfortunately I had to work and wasn't into getting ready and going out after. At the time, I was a waitress at a restaurant. It was open until midnight on weekends, and we were pretty busy all the way up to that point. He seemed cool with it, and we agreed on Sunday night. Throughout the week, we messaged back and forth on the Tinder app. I'm not sure why we never actually exchanged numbers. That was alright with me, though. Saturday arrived, and I was receiving messages all afternoon, saying things like he was going to miss me tonight, and that he really wished I could go. That night at around 8:30, the hostess came up to me and said she just sat me a table of 6 that requested me as their server. Curious, I looked over the ledge and couldn't believe my eyes. It was Kyle with 5 of his friends. I was happy to see him, of course, but part of me wished he would have told me he was coming. I really don't like being blindsided. I did appreciate the effort, though. I came over, and right away his friends were acting like teenage boys. Even though we were all into our mid-20s, they were howling and being idiots. Kyle apologized, and I just shrugged it off. Anybody who's ever been a waitress knows that you'll always deal with stupid people. It's unfortunately part of the job. It seemed like every 2 minutes, the table was calling me over for something. Most of the time, it was for stupid questions on Kyle's behalf. Once I was officially annoyed, Kyle called me over and asked if I would please reconsider and go to the party with them. I didn't want to go at all, and after tonight I was kind of done with Kyle as well. I did something a little mean because I was so annoyed, just to see if he would do it. In front of all of his friends, I told him to get on his hands and knees in the restaurant and beg me to go if he was really sincere. His friends erupted into cheers and laughed. They had no choice but to do it now. To his credit, he actually did it and sincerely begged me to go. While his friends were dying of laughter, I told him I would get ready after work. The one condition was I was going to drive myself, because I didn't know what time I was getting out, and I needed to go home first no matter what. He agreed and told me to message him when I was close. I wasn't thrilled about going, but I told myself I could use a fun time out. I worked the rest of the shift and was able to leave right at midnight. I got home and quickly got dressed. I messaged Kyle to send me the address, and he sent it back right away. The party was 36 minutes away from my house, which really annoyed me. I wouldn't get there until nearly 1 a.m. As I got closer, I realized we still hadn't exchanged numbers, so I couldn't call him. Wherever I was going, it was pitch black, and seemingly in the middle of nowhere. I finally pulled up to a small farmhouse where all the lights were turned off. I sat in my car for a minute and messaged Kyle a few times. Finally, he answered and said he would come out and get me. He said the party was in the back of the barn. A minute later, he emerged from behind the house, wobbling around. He was clearly messed up. By the time I got there, he could barely form a complete sentence. I was about to get in my car and drive home, which I really should have. Since I had taken all the time to drive out here, though, I figured I would at least see what this party was all about. Kyle put his arm around me and sort of guided me behind the house. Not far from the back was a decent-sized barn. I could see lights coming from the open door. We made our way in, and I instantly regretted my decision. Inside were 2 guys I didn't recognize, 2 older men easily in their 40s or 50s. All the guys he was with in the restaurant were nowhere to be found. There were no girls, no music, no food, no anything. It was just me, Kyle, and these two suspicious men. I was not about to take any chances. I looked at him and told him I was leaving. In a dead serious voice, he said, "No, you're not leaving." He suddenly wasn't stumbling around anymore. It seemed like it was all an act just to get me inside. I turned around and one of the guys was behind me, and the other was next to the barn doors. You see, I always keep pepper spray on this keychain I had, and I had no regrets as I sprayed the old men in the face. I made a dash for the barn door. Luckily, I was able to get out before anybody was able to shut it closed. While I was running to my car, I could hear Kyle screaming my name and begging me to come back. This time I was smart though, and just kept driving. I drove past my house and parked at a 24-hour gas station. I went through our entire Tinder conversation to see if I'd ever told him where I lived. Thankfully, I'd never shared that information. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to my parents' house and crashed there on the couch. The next day, I told my parents about what had happened, and we alerted the authorities just to see if there was anything that could be done. The Tinder account had been deactivated, and since I never had a phone number or anything, I couldn't give the police any information. Since nothing physically happened to me, they didn't seem all too interested. I guess they did check out that farm, but they found nothing suspicious other than an elderly man who lived there. To this day, I've never seen Kyle or any of his friends again. I don't know what was going to happen, and I don't know if anything even would have happened. I often go back to that night mentally and try to see if I was misremembering anything. I'll always remember it as if it happened yesterday, though. I'll never have any answers as to what Kyle intended, and I'll always be left with the memory of that nightmare. When I was about 11, we moved to this really old pre-war house. My room was in the attic. Great at first because it was really big. Each night I laid down, my eyes were drawn to the opposite corner of the room. I would just stare at the wall and become really freaked out for some reason. It took me a couple of weeks to tell anyone because nothing had really happened to me. One night I tried to explain to my dad what was wrong. He walked over to the wall and knocked on it to show there was nothing weird about it at all. Well, needless to say, he was very surprised when one of his bangs sounded very different. It sounded like it was just board instead of brick. He investigated and found a small square board, papered over and flush with the wall around it. We pulled it off and pulled out some debris as well. Inside, we found a secret room with a bed so old the mattress had crumbled away into nothing. There were old papers and a tin with a football program, various stuff from the 40s. Someone had wanted that room forgotten about. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but it really freaked us all out, and we moved away only a few months later. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that little notification bell so you never miss a story. And if you have your own encounter you'd like to share, leave a comment below. Who knows, it might just find its way into a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the scariest stories are often the ones closest to home.